Alva, the mind-body problem tries to relate our minds to our brains. What is this thing of consciousness? It's been around for hundreds of years, if not millennia. Science, neuroscience is really focusing on it hard, seems to be bringing an identity between what we think is the mind and what we know to be the brain. You've talked about different ways of approaching this, like, you need the person, not just the brain, to have semantic powers of understanding. An import of externalism, not just the internalism. How do these concepts help us understand and solve the mind-body problem?
Part of the challenge that we face is putting our fingers on the processes and mechanisms in terms of which we can understand, for example, how we perceive. What is the machinery of vision? One thought might be that the machinery of vision is neurological, exhaustively neurological. But another possibility might be that that neurological machinery is a kind of reactive, that it requires a sort of a two-way interplay between it and the environment to function properly. So that if you were to take away the environment, it would shrivel up. I look at a poster and it's covered with colors and words and details, and I have a sense now that it's all there in my consciousness. We know from experimental work that if I were to glance at it and then you were to take it away and ask me to tell you what I'd seen, I'd be able to describe it very poorly and in a very limited way. Now, some people think that shows that that idea that we were aware of it all in the first place was an illusion. But I don't think it shows that at all, because it's actually not part of our pre-theoretical self-understanding that we have the world in mind. I didn't think to myself, aha, I've now internalized that poster. Rather, I took myself to encounter this thing which is there and which is within reach. I can turn here and turn there and turn here, and I can look away and forget something and look back. And through this ongoing, temporally extended interplay between me and, in this case, I'm imagining a poster, have something which we call an experience of all that rich detail. Perception is not a snapshot. Consciousness is not a snapshot. It's a game, like a baseball game, where, a tiny slice through the game is nothing. It's just people standing like this with no movement. A game is movement, activity, interaction, point, trajectory, goals, right? So I think we need a perspective on these questions that takes that seriously. And if we do that, we're outside the head. And in that sense, what I want to pose as a possibility for science is the idea that not all of the machinery, in virtue of which we see, or in virtue of which our other cognitive capacities unfold, is inside us. If you like, the machinery which makes consciousness happen extends across this boundary into the world. This is not a magical boundary. There's nothing special about my skull.
Well, you're taking a view that goes against the tide of current neuroscience, which would say that, sure, there's an outside world, but it is just the only time it impinges our consciousness when it's represented by nerve impulses coming in from our senses and then comes into our brain and represented in our brain in a purely internalism way of thinking. Right. You have now this externalism way of thinking, and I'm trying to get at whether this is just an enriching semantic discussion, or there's some fundamental ontology, metaphysics, and some fundamental difference in what you're talking about. That's what I can't get.
That's good, thank you. There's two very different pictures of what's going on here. You're exactly right. You put your finger on it when you say that the standard view is that there's the world out there and it causes events in here, and it's those events in here which make for my experience, which make for my thinking, which make for my aspirations, which make me what I am. I'm saying, well, actually, we don't really know how that works. If we look inside there, we can't tell a story confined just to those neurological resources that gives us the explanation we want. Let's try a different strategy. Let's, instead of thinking that the brain alone makes for the consciousness as a result of causal impinging of the world, let's instead say the brain's job is to enable us to couple with the world, to become one with the world, to send out our roots and shoots into it and get entangled with it. That's what the brain's job is. The brain can't do that job without the world. The brain needs the world to do that. If you were to imagine that it were all to happen randomly as a result of the world, that would be a form of madness. That would be a form of mental breakdown. That wouldn't be a different form of experience.
I'm trying to get a sense, is this a distinction without a difference or with a difference? I understand the distinction, but I can't come to see that it's a fundamental difference.
Right. If I'm right, and this is a in principle testable claim, if I'm right, then neurological conditions are not alone sufficient for states of consciousness. You can't have consciousness in a test tube. To make a conscious being, you need to make a conscious world. And that's what evolution is. Evolution has been this experiment where living organisms have evolved as embedded and coupled and interacted with and extended into their environment.
But I can't access the outside world. I have no way of knowing, as Kant said, the thing in itself. The only thing I know are what things present themselves to me. Vision is photons that have been reflected from different surfaces at different wavelengths, and sound waves are movement of air, and olfaction are molecules that bind with receptors in my olfactory places. And I mean that's all I got. I can't interact with the things in themselves. Impossible. It's not the way the world works.
You've been indoctrinated, my friend. If you look at a loved one, you think all you see is photons? You know your loved one. You encounter your loved one. And when you put your hand on this table, it's the table that you put your hand on. And that needs to be, I'm not talking about the skeptical doubt. What if it's all an illusion? I'm sort of putting that to one side.
I agree.
The skeptic can't be silenced. One could always ask, how do you know?
Sure. I'm on your wavelength.
What I'm suggesting is that as natural scientists, what we ought to be doing is recognizing that there's a world there available to us. And the question is understanding how we enjoy it, not how we reduplicate it inside our brains.